Okay, so the last video in Unit 4 is going to talk about many of the accomplishments of the Greeks. Now, I didn't really get into talking about all the sculpture and that type of stuff, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in class. What I'm going to focus on is the creations in architecture and drama, and particularly philosophy. We're going to talk about Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And then we're going to finish up by talking about Alexander the Great. He was really different from some of the other conquerors that we had talked about, and he had a big impact on that region because of that. Okay, I hope you enjoy the video, and again, this will finish up the unit.
Okay, this is Unit 4, Part 5, and we're going to be talking about the accomplishments of Athens during the Golden Age, and then we're going to talk about probably the greatest early conqueror, Alexander the Great. Alright, this is the SOL that we're going to be talking about in this particular lesson. We're going to be talking about life in Athens during the Golden Age, Pericles. We're going to be citing the contributions in the many different fields with an emphasis on the philosophers, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And then we're going to talk about how Greece was conquered by Macedonia, and then the spread of Hellenism and the culture that is created by Alexander the Great. Okay, so let's talk about the Golden Age of Pericles. Obviously, the Golden Age was the period that was mostly between the Persian and Peloponnesian Wars. It's a time of great accomplishment in all fields. Pericles did many things to extend democracy. Most adult males had pretty much an equal voice within Athenian society during this time. Now notice I didn't say females, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. Pericles had Athens rebuilt after it was destroyed during the Persian Wars. The Parthenon is an example of this reconstruction. Now, the fact that he used money from other city-states is going to be a problem down the road, but with causing the Peloponnesian War. But still, it was a massive rebuild, and it did wonders for Athens. Okay, so one of the big things that comes out of the Golden Age is drama. And there are different types of theater that we're going to talk about, and the father of one particular type of drama is called Aeschylus. And Aeschylus was known as the father of tragedy. Tragedy is when the lead character struggles against all types of odds and situations, and they're basically doomed by some tragic flaw. It might be that they have greed, or they are vain. Something happens that leads them down the tragic road. Another writer of drama who was one of Aeschylus's main competitions during playwriting competitions was Sophocles. His most famous work is Oedipus Rex. And if you haven't heard the legend of Oedipus Rex, according to it, Oedipus was born to a king and queen, and through a prophecy they found out that he was supposed to kill his father and marry his mother. And of course, the father wanted him killed, but his mother has him taken away to another kingdom where he's raised, and he doesn't realize that that's not his home. So when he finds out about the prophecy, he leaves, where he comes to a crossroads where he kills a dude in a fight, and he goes into the city, and they said that guy was our ruler. He wasn't very good, and he meets his wife, Shazam. They fall in love, even though she's a little older. Well, you get the idea. He killed his mother. He killed his father, and he married his mother. So yeah, the legend came true anyhow. And I think then she commits suicide, and he rips his own eyes out, something like that. It was one of those touchy-feely, good vibes type of plays. Okay, and the last person that you need to know about in drama is Aristophanes. Aristophanes is known as the father of comedy, plays that have a comedic element to them. Makes me laugh. Okay, but there were writers that did other things. Obviously, we've already talked about Homer, who really never wrote his stories down, but others did. The Iliad and the Odyssey. Most writing was about history during this time period, however. Herodotus is the father of history. That's what he's known as. And his most famous book was called Historia, which was about the Persian Wars. Now, the thing is Herodotus included the stories of the gods and those things in his history, and it wasn't always considered to be the most scientific in terms of history. The person who gets credit for doing that is going to be Thucydides. Thucydides wrote the history of the Peloponnesian Wars. He is considered to be one of the first scientific historians. He rejected the gods playing a role. He interviewed eyewitnesses. He went to sites, and that is why he is considered to be the first scientific historian. Okay, how about architecture? First off, remember that temples were built as houses for the gods. The Greeks believed that the gods lived there. And the architecture was simple but classic. There were three styles of columns that were used in Greek architecture that we need to know about. The first of these is Doric. It is the oldest and the widest. It had no base at the bottom, and so it looked like this. And I'm going to show you a full picture on the next screen. Ionic columns had a base and were scroll-shaped, so they look like this at the top. And then the last of the Greek columns, whoops, I brought up a whole picture there. The last of the Greek columns was the Corinthian, which is the most complex, and it had leaves. Okay, so these are the columns again. Doric, notice at the bottom, no base. Ionic, which had a base and the scroll shapes, is in the middle, and then Corinthian. And you can see how complex the carvings at the top of the Corinthian were. Okay, the Parthenon that was built on the Acropolis, the temple to Athena, which had her statue in it, was built during the Golden Age, from 447 BC to 432 BC, and it was the Doric style column. Okay, so what were some of the accomplishments in science? Okay, first there was Thales, who used astronomy to the point where he could predict an eclipse. Also, you had a mathematician named Pythagoras. He came up with the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. And don't ever look directly into an eclipse. You know, they say it'll burn your eyes out. I don't know if that's true or not, but I think it's probably pretty accurate. Okay, so some more arts and science from the Hellenistic period. Euclid wrote the Elements of Geometry. Aristarchus agreed that the sun was larger than the earth and that the earth actually revolved around the sun. Pretty cool, huh? The sun was happy about that. He finally got his props. Eratosthenes estimated that the Earth's diameter, he got the size right to within 1%, which is amazing. He didn't have satellites or that type of technology. Archimedes was the inventor of many simple tools, like the pulley and the screw. Now, there are many other accomplishments in both mathematics and science that the Greeks are responsible for. And we'll even talk some more in class about some of the great sculptors that came about. Okay, how about medicine? In medicine, up until now, remember, they believed that the gods and goddesses could cause people to be sick. And then Hippocrates came along. And Hippocrates believed that through proper hygiene, healthcare, diet, and rest, that everyone could be healed or at least live a more healthy lifestyle. Today, all doctors take a Hippocratic oath. And it is, again, a sort of an honoring of Hippocrates and his start of medicine. Okay, so there are three great philosophers that you need to know about. Okay, Socrates is probably the greatest of the ancient philosophers. Socrates believed that you should think for yourself. And he said that everyone should always question authority. Now, later on, this is going to get him in trouble. He did his teaching through something called the Socratic method. And I have a video that's going to be linked on your classroom page that will show this Socratic method in its full detail. Now, he is charged with corrupting the youth of Athens in 399 BC and found guilty. Now, he could have been put into exile, but he said he had lived his whole life in Athens, and he was not going to leave, so he drank a poison called hemlock with all of his friends around and died from the punishment. The second great philosopher was a student of Socrates named Plato. Plato founded an academy after Socrates' death. Now, the academy stayed open for nearly 1,000 years. He also wrote books. His most famous was called The Republic, where he describes his ideal society. He believed that society should be ruled by philosopher kings, and they should come from a middle class because they knew how to rule over people and they knew how to follow orders. The third great philosopher was Aristotle. Dante, the great writer, called Aristotle the master of those who know. He wrote over 200 books on all topics. Now, he didn't always get it right. He believed that the Earth was the center of the solar system. Oops. And he's probably most famous, despite all these great accomplishments, for tutoring Alexander the Great. Okay, so now on your notes, you got a couple of things I need you to do. First, in the boxes that are right here on this chart, I need you to talk about items from today that you think have been influenced by the Greeks of the Golden Age. Right here. And then, in the space over here, I would like you to come up with a theory, create a theory as to why so many accomplishments of intellect and art happened in Athens. Okay, so that means we have to finish up with the Macedonians. Alright, the king of Macedon in 359 BC was Philip II. Now, Philip had been scarred in battle, but his fighting formation was one that the Greeks were very familiar with. It was called a phalanx. And in the video on Sparta that I will post on the webpage, you'll see how a phalanx worked. Soldiers fought shoulder to shoulder in rows. By 338 BC, Philip II had conquered most of Greece, and he intended to launch an attack on the old enemy of the Greeks, Persia. But he was assassinated before invading Persia. Now, one of the things I want you to know is that Philip had different wives, and he had different offspring. And the most famous offspring was his son, Alexander, who supposedly was born a god on earth. Lightning struck a big tower in Macedon the day that he was born, and his mother believed that the gods had sent him there. But Philip's wife, Alexander's mother, had a falling out. And so Alexander and his mother had left for a while, and they'd been invited back for this Let's Invade Persia party. And on the way there, Alexander was walking beside his father when an assassin jumped out. Now, many people suspect Alexander's mother of being behind this assassination. And the main reason is that a baby had been born to one of Philip's younger wives, and she was worried that Alexander would be passed over for this younger baby. So after Philip was killed, Alexander killed the assassin, and then the baby was thrown into a sacrificial fire, and the mother committed suicide. So there's, a lot of things going on there that point the finger at Alexander's mother. Okay, but Alexander managed to get the troops on his side. By age 20, he had now become the king. Now, he had been an army leader and saved his father in battle twice already since the time he was 16. He was very well educated, much more educated than early rulers and soldiers of that time period. Remember, Aristotle had taught him to be not only an amazing soldier, he had been trained by the best military minds, but also just a well-rounded individual. His first move was to complete his father's task of conquering the Persians. Alexander defeated the Persians at the Granicus River, and some of the Greek cities had sent people to fight against Alexander. He gave quarter to all the Persian rulers, but he basically killed all the Greeks who fought against him. By the time he was done with his conquering, his kingdom stretched from Greece all the way to India. Now, Alexander's troops finally wanted to turn around in India. They had been fighting for 13 years, and they were like, hey man, you know, it's great that we conquered all these things, but it's not fun if we can't celebrate with our families and our loved ones. And on the way back, Alexander caught malaria, and he died in Babylon. All of his soldiers went by his bed to say goodbye to him. His 3 top generals asked him who would get his kingdom, and Alexander's response was, the strongest. He wanted them to fight for it. So you know what they did, right? They split it up into 3 territories. They're called domains. But it didn't really matter because the Romans were coming and they were soon going to take over. Here come the Romans. Okay, but the greatest thing that Alexander leaves behind is not the conquering city-state. The idea is that he left behind a culture that was a mixture of Greek and the Persian world. Alexander himself had had all of his men marry Persian women after he had conquered the Persian Empire. And there's a lot of stories that go into the whole thing. Alexander's appreciation of learning is what made Hellenism so strong. And he left behind cities that were named after himself. Alexandria, Alexandropolis. There were like 20, 30 Alexandrias during the day because he had named so many cities after himself. He did name one after his horse, and I'll give bonus points to anyone who can bring up the name of that horse when we take the test on Greece. A hint is you can find it on the crash course video. But the traits of Hellenism spread through trade. He'd established great cities, had many more rights for women, and all of this again was tied to his appreciation of learning. Okay, so now, in your notes, I want you to defend the following statement. Alexander the Great was truly different from other conquerors before and after him. Why? Do it right here on your notes. Bang. Okay, let's check out the big ideas for this video. First, the Greeks had many contributions to Western civilization in art, architecture, drama, and philosophy. Alexander the Great established an empire from Greece to Egypt to the edges of India. And the blend of Greek and Asian or Oriental culture called Hellenism was spread by Alexander's conquest and trade throughout that region. Alright, that'll end up the videos for Unit 4. I hope you enjoyed them all.